Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Bromeliad enthusiasts. Welcome to the September LBVBS Zoom presentation featuring Andrew Devonshire from Auckland, New Zealand. I'm Ken Simpson, Vice President. Welcome to our members and guests. Thank you for joining us. Paul Nakamura has muted all participants for this presentation. Please stay muted during the presentation. Adjust the view on your screen, your Zoom window for either speaker or gallery. Andrew will take questions after his presentation. You may unmute yourself during your question only. When finished, please mute yourself. We thank you, Andrew, for all the time and effort you put into this presentation for us to enjoy tonight. To the right is a beautiful recent Alcantara hybrid made by Andrew. The following presentation features many of his Neoregelia hybrids. Andrew is 56 years old, married, with 3 children and 1 granddaughter. He lives on the north shore of Auckland, New Zealand. He has always been interested in nature and the outdoors, with the fascination of bromeliads for about 20 years. To date, he has registered almost 100 hybrids, most well known of which Neoregelia golden pheasant. This hybrid is now available worldwide. Shown in the picture to the left is another beauty called Neoregelia my pheasant. The LBVBS is a nonprofit organization. Attendance at our Zoom presentations is free to all Bromeliad enthusiasts. If you'd like to receive announcements of our future meetings, please email your name to lbvbs@dslextreme.com regarding Zoom. And if you'd like to support our efforts, donations can be made to offset our presentation. You can use your camera to take a picture of the link or the QR code below to make a donation. I'm going to turn this back to Paul and Andrew. And Andrew, you may start sharing your screen.
Okay, thanks Ken. Thanks very much for that introduction. So I've got my screen there. Can you see that?
Beautiful.
Great. So this evening, what I thought I'd do is really go through a photo slideshow to show you my journey with hybridizing, starting off with how I got introduced to bromeliads, showing off some of my hybrids, and then as we go through towards the end, just finishing up on a hybridizing project that I've been working on over the last few years. Now, as mentioned in the introduction, Ken said that I'm from New Zealand, so there may be a few of you wondering where that is. So let's have a look at a map here. Obviously, the meeting's being hosted tonight up here in California. So if you come down over Hawaii and head down to the South Pacific, you'll find New Zealand right here off the coast of Australia. So we've got a North and a South Island, and I live in the North Island up here in the major city of Auckland. Now, New Zealand has a population of around about 5 million in total, and Auckland has a population of about 1.5 million. But you can see Auckland's based on a fairly narrow landmass, so we have quite a changeable climate. You'd probably describe our climate as subtropical, but we can grow bromeliads quite well. And towards the end of the presentation, I've got a couple of photos just to show you some examples of how well bromeliads can grow in the garden situation here. One interesting point about Auckland is that just to get from the east coast here right across to the west coast, you can do that in well under an hour's drive. So it's really quite a narrow landmass there. To give you an idea on temperatures, we're just coming out of winter. It's currently spring in New Zealand. So our winter max gets up to about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and we drop down to around about 40 or even lower than that. So the problem we have in winter is not only do we get those cooler temperatures, but we get a lot of rain. So bromeliads don't tend to like that combination of being cold and wet. And that's part of the problem we have. So there's a lot of the more tropical types of bromeliads that we cannot grow, but there are a number that do tolerate those winter conditions. Summer for us, though, is a different story, and it's probably ideal growing conditions for bromeliads. Summer will get up to a maximum of about 80, with that minimum at about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so that's probably enough about maps and temperatures. Let's move on with the photos. So that's obviously not a bromeliad, but many of you might know what that is. It's a Mexican walking fish, or what they sometimes call an axolotl, and they do actually come from Mexico. What I thought I'd do is just include, yeah.
You weren't supposed to put photos of me in here.
Yeah. What I thought I'd do is just include a few photos of some of my early interests before I got totally obsessed with bromeliads. So for me, these little critters really did kick it off. I got a pair of these when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, and by the time I was in my very early teens, I'd built up a few pair of these and was able to breed them. And I managed to breed them so successfully that I ended up supplying the local pet shops. Then later on in my probably mid to late teens, I developed a real interest in cage and aviary birds. We were colour breeding budgies. We had cockatiels. This neat little parakeet up here on the right-hand side is a native New Zealand parakeet called the kakariki. You have to have a permit to keep them, and we managed to get a permit and bred those over a number of years. And then down the bottom here are rainbow lorikeets. They were an Australian lorikeet, and I had this pair here, and they were very successful at raising many chicks over a few years. Then during my late teens and into my early 20s, I got really obsessed with tropical fish. And you can probably already see a bit of a trend developing. When I get interested in something, I go all out and get totally enthused in it. And it was no different for tropical fish. So I was never going to be happy just having 1 or 2 aquarium set up. And over the course of a few years, I built up to the stage where I had about 20 breeding aquariums set up in our basement. And I had 5 or 6 of these large furnished type planted tanks set up as well. And I think looking back now, it's probably during that stage that I developed a real interest in plants. What I found with these tropical tanks is that you not only needed a good knowledge of how to keep the fish growing well and healthy, but you needed a good understanding of plants, what their lighting requirements were, what type of plants grew well together. So that really started that interest for me. So moving over to the bromeliads, and for me, that bromeliad journey really did kick off in 2002. So as Ken said, almost 20 years ago. During this time, my wife and I were landscaping our property in Auckland, and we'd typically spend our weekends heading out for garden visits, going to local nurseries just to try and get ideas of plants and different plant combinations. And it was during one of those garden visits that I came across these particular plants, and they absolutely blew me away. I had no idea that these plants were bromeliads or that they were even available in Auckland. So I think as soon as I saw those, I was totally hooked and never really looked back. So this was really was a golden age for bromeliads in New Zealand. We had a guy called Andrew Malloy. If you're into your Variegation hybrids, you'll know that name. Andrew Malloy is a very well-known bromeliad, or especially Variegation hybridizer. He had set up a company called Kiwi Bromeliads, and he was releasing the first of his foliage Variegation hybrids. And they were all of these green type foliage Variegans. At that stage, we had none of the reds and pinks and amazing purple Variegation hybrids that we get today. But about the best thing I did during this stage was to join up with the local Bromeliad Society. And as luck would have it, the very first meeting that I went to, we had a guy speaking called Jerry Stansfield. And if you've been involved in bromeliads for a few years, you may know that name. At the time, Jerry Stansfield was probably the most prolific hybridizer in New Zealand. And ironically, that first meeting that I went to, Jerry's topic was on hybridizing bromeliads and growing bromeliads from seed. So for me, that was really my introduction. And so I really started growing bromeliads from seed and hybridizing straight away. And it was with those Variesia that really caught my attention. Here are some of my very early hybrids. And as you can see, they're all Variesia related. The funny thing is that at this time, I had no real interest in Nerogelia at all. To me, they were just the ugly little plants that went down the back corner of the garden. And to my mind, there was no way those could compare with the elegance of plants like these types of Variesia, or for that matter, the large Alcantaria. But that point of view for me changed, and it changed quite dramatically in 2003. We had the chance to head over to Australia. I had a cousin of mine got married in Brisbane, and we went over for the wedding. And just before the wedding, we had a chance to spend a bit of time as a holiday up on the Sunshine Coast. And during that holiday, we visited this garden, and this photo may be familiar to some of you. It's actually a photo I took at the time of the garden of Grace Good. So many of you who are into your Nerogelia hybrids will know the name Grace Good, the famous Australian hybridizer. And she was amazing. It was fantastic to be able to visit her and see her incredible hybrids. And I think just spending time with Grace and picking up on her passion and enthusiasm for bromeliads in general, but especially for Nerogelia hybrids, really did change my point of view. So I came back from that Australian trip with real interest to see what I could do in terms of hybridizing with Nerogelia. Now, I just left this photo in. This was another photo I took when I was visiting Grace Good, and it looks down over one of her shade structures that she was well known for making to protect her bromeliads. So these are basically handmade shade structures. It's a wire mesh frame, and she would actually tie hundreds of little clumps of Tillandsia onto these shade structures to create a natural shade for her bromeliads. And this is how I met Grace. When I arrived at her property, I see Grace down her driveway, halfway up a stepladder, and she's tying these little clumps of Tillandsia onto one of these overhead shade structures. And at that time, she would have been in her probably mid to late 80s. So yeah, quite an amazing character. So as I said, I came back from that Australian trip with a real interest to see what I could do in terms of hybridizing with Nerogelia. And I poured through the online database just to try and get an idea on what plants appealed to me. And it was these type of large landscaping neos that really did appeal. So I set about building up a collection of plants like Coreaujoy, Johannes, Gee Whiz, all those large type plants. And over the next few years, I hybridized everything I could that came into flower and produced hundreds and hundreds of large landscaping type hybrids. The problem I found is that as these hybrids started to develop and color up, there was very, very little that was outstanding. Most of it that was, coming up and coloring up just looked like plants that were already out there, plants that had already been registered. So the result of all of my early years of hybridizing was that about 99% of those hybrids ended up being thrown out into the composting. There were a couple that I kept from those early years. This is one of them that I quite like. I've still got it today. It's proved to be a large, tough plant, ideally suited for our garden conditions. It's called Pacific Maui, and it's a Coreaujoy hybrid. So you can see the influence of Coreaujoy there with the red coloration on the outer leaves. And it's got Barbarian as the other parent, which gives it this really nice spotting on the inner leaves. So you can just imagine my property at this sort of point in time, we've got a standard residential site. I don't have a large nursery. We had hundreds of these large landscaping type neos coming on. I still had my collection of Variegation and Alcantara. So we were just literally running out of space. And it was really because of that and because of my desire to carry on hybridizing that I started turning my attention to the smaller size neo hybrids. And about this time, Hannibal Lecter was just becoming available in New Zealand, and Chester Skotak really did an amazing job with that hybrid and opened up Pandora's box in terms of appealing to people like me who wanted to hybridize and get that sort of banded pattern. So here are some examples of some of my early hybrids. And they feature this banded pattern, which I was, really wanting to achieve in a lot of these smaller type miniature neo hybrids. So this one was called Bumblebee. And quite a popular little plant. Now, as we go through these photos, you'll often see that I've got my hand or thumb in the photos. And what I try and do that for is just to give you an idea on size. When you look at a photo of a bromeliad, it's really hard to work out if it's a large plant or a smaller size neo. So just by having a hand in there, it does give you a bit of a sense of scale. So as I said, Bumblebees proved to be a very popular little hybrid. And here it is here. I was lucky enough that it won the prize for the best miniature bromeliad at our recent annual show with the New Zealand Bromeliad Society. This is another one that features this nice banded or zonated type pattern. This was called Ritzy Tiger. And it's a cross of Ritzy and Blushing Tiger. And it was during this time that I developed a friendship with the Hawaiian hybridizer, Lisa Vincent. Now, many of you will know Lisa and be familiar with her hybrid. She's got many, many years of hybridizing experience. She's a wonderful lady, and she's had a huge influence on me and my hybridizing. And incidentally, it is her birthday today. So Lisa, if you're seeing this, I wish you a very happy birthday. Here's another shot of Ritzy Tiger, just a top-down view. But this illustrates one thing I love about miniature bromeliads, miniature neos, is that there's about 9 plants within that clump, all growing inside one small hanging pot. And that's a neat thing about these miniature neos. You could never do that with those larger landscaping type plants. Now, what I find in hybridizing is it's a real challenge to come up with new and unique names when you are trying to find names for registering hybrids. So what I've tended to do is to name plants in series. And this is one or a group of plants that I have named after what I call my coffee series, where they're named after coffee blends or coffee brands. So here are some examples of those. This is a true miniature. This is Espresso. It's a Wee Willie Pheasant hybrid. Havana's a little bit larger. That's got Clarice in the mix. Altura, again, featuring that nice banded pattern. And this one I really like. I've always had an eye for the darker type Nerogelia hybrids, and this one gets that really nice dark coloration on the outer leaves. And a few of these last ones are available in the States. Mondello, another larger one with Clarice in the mix. And Pacifica, this is an Ampullaceae hybrid. And it was getting hybrids like this developing that gave me a real interest in trying to enhance this leaf color. You can see this one's got almost a rusty red coloration on there, but still has that banding. So the next part of this hybridizing journey for me was to try and develop plants that still had that nice banded or zonated pattern, but add a bit of extra color into the leaves. And here are some examples of those. This one is one called Fire Starter. And this has got a really nice, naturally glossy leaf, but still has that banded or zonated pattern with a red leaf color. Dragon Heart, this is a little bit larger, again with that wonderful hybrid Clarice in the mix. And this one's called Tawa Tigers. Tawa is Maori, our local language Maori for purple. And I did a bit of hybridizing with Purple Star. Purple Star is one of Grant Grove's hybrids, and it does quite well in our growing conditions. So I thought it'd be neat to try and keep that purple coloration from Purple Star and see if I could bring it into my hybridizing and add those bands, those darker bands of zonation. And this one's proved to be very popular here and in Australia. One thing I like about Tawa Tiger is that as it develops and comes into flower and opens up, the whole plant gets really, really dark, almost black, which is very unusual for Neoregelia hybrids. Now, the next stage in this journey for me was trying to add red lines or red striation into these hybrids. And I really did become quite obsessed with that trait of red striation. And I built up a collection of a range of plants like Rosia lineata and plants like that that had those nice red lines to see how they could combine with my hybrids. And here's one where the patterns combined quite well. This one's called Life Force. Another one that's available in the States. Here's a top-down view. And you can really see here it's got these nice red lines coming through that combine quite well with the cross-banding or the zonated pattern. This is another one, fairly similar. Life Candy is just a little bit smaller than Life Force. The main reason I kept and registered this one is that you can see on a few of the leaves here on this plant at the bottom, it's got some of these broader bands of red striation. And so I had an idea that because of that, this plant could possibly throw a sport or a pup very similar to the dark form of Amazing Grace. So after playing around with this plant for a few years and growing many, many pups, I managed to get this plant produced. So this is actually quite an eye-catching little hybrid coming off Life Candy. And you can see those nice dark lines, which is really just where the red striation combines to form those nice red bands. The problem I found with this one after spending many years creating it, it's very unstable, those red bands. It's very hard to get pups coming out exactly like the mother plant. So for me, it's still very much a work in progress. This is another one from that same hybridizing project, but it's got a really nice tropical look to it with that multi-layered leaf stacking, and it's very unusual in our climate. Because of our cold, wet winters, it's very rare for us to get that stacking in New Zealand conditions. So quite neat to be able to get a hybrid that sort of bucks the trend and can get that nice tropical look. As I said, I'm quite obsessed with these hybrids with red lines. So here are some more examples. This one's called Life Burst, and this was a hybrid with marble throat. So you can see the marble throat influence gives it that white center, but it really helps accentuate the lines of red striation. This one is Life Blood. This is albo-marginated. And you can see quite a nice combination of red lines, the red splashes, and the nice bright red leaf tips. Life Song. This one to me is almost got a three-dimensional look with the combination of the green lines, the red lines, and the white variegation. And it does have quite a nice punch of color as it comes into flower. Another one, Life Blush. This is a larger, probably medium to large size Nerogelia hybrid. And this one's proved to be quite popular. You can just make out, a few of these red lines still coming through in this hybrid. But for me as a hybridizer, I always try and enhance patterns. And it was one of my goals to get a plant like this, but make that trait of red striation or red lines even more enhanced. So what I did is keep working with this type of hybrid and crossing it back to red striated plants. And I've just recently named and released this one. So this is a plant called My Lifeline, quite an eye-catching Nerogelia hybrid with these neat bright center areas coming through with the variegation. And just to give you an idea, looking at that on a close-up of the leaves, so the leaves, that bright coloration is actually made up of many lines of red striation. So it makes it quite an eye-catching plant. So moving on now to look at a totally different type of hybrid. And these are ones that I've worked on over the last few years that really do appeal to me. So they're ones like this that feature this yellow and red type banded pattern. So this one was called Fever Pitch. And here's Golden Pheasant. As Ken said, this is probably my most popular hybrid. It's quite prolific. It grows incredibly well in a range of conditions. So it's now being distributed worldwide. But the name for this one, for me, was really a tribute to Grace Good. And it was great to be able to recognize her and that influence that she had on me in those early years of hybridizing. And Pheasant, the parent here, is a Grace Good hybrid. So neat to be able to use one of her hybrids in this cross. One thing I've found with this particular plant, Golden Pheasant, is it can be quite variable in coloration depending on how it's grown and its stage of growth. So to give you some examples, this is the typical form or the typical way you'd see Golden Pheasant, featuring those yellow and red, that yellow and red banded type pattern. But to give you an idea on how that can change, what I've done is just taken a series of photos over a few years to show you how the coloration can develop. So if you look on the left-hand side here, 2015, I potted up 4 pups, and you can see that they feature the standard yellow and red banded pattern. Then just a year later, that's exactly the same 4 plants, and they're just starting to get a little bit more of this red coloration coming through on the outer leaves. And then one more year on, that is exactly the same 4 plants, followed through another year. And as they develop and mature, you can see they get that really nice ring of red leaves on the outside. So Golden Pheasants proved to be a very, very popular plant. And because it's prolific, grows well in a wide range of conditions, and very, very tough, it's been a natural choice for me to use in hybridizing. And one of those projects that's turned out quite well is what I've called my Sunfire Series. So this Sunfire Series is a cross of Golden Pheasant, and I used Chester Skotak's wonderful find of Skotak's Tiger as the pollen parent. Skotak's Tiger is a great tough plant, grows very well for us here in our New Zealand conditions, and it's got that combination of banding and really nice spine. So I wanted to combine those traits into my little hybrid of Golden Pheasant. And I managed to create a group of hybrids like this. So these are probably medium to larger type neo hybrids, but they all feature this nice yellow and red banded pattern that they've got from Golden Pheasant. Some of the ones that have been named here, this is Sunfire Prince. And this photo shows you how they've got their name. So this photo is taken with the sunlight coming in behind the plant, but the whole plant looks like it's on fire when it's lit up that way. So hence the combination of the name Sunfire. And this one's Sunfire Tiger, quite nice wide leaves on this hybrid. Sunfire Fever, a little bit more of that red coloration coming through on the outer leaves. And Sunfire Phoenix, so a lot more red coloration coming through on this one. One of the most popular in this group is what I've called Sunfire Pheasant. So this one really does have a look of that Scotex tiger with a lot of the spine action coming through, and it's proved to be a very popular plant. One of my favorites is this one, Sunfire Storm, and for me this really combines the traits of all of the group with having that nice red and yellow banded center with the ring of dark leaves on the outside. Just to give you an idea on how these plants can color up, if you look on the left-hand side here, there's a very green pup coming off a mother plant of Sunfire Storm that's probably had a bit too much fertilizer. But I had a friend of mine who really wanted a pup, and this was the only one I had available. So we did a deal. He brought that green pup off me, and then a year later, he sent me this photo on the right-hand side. So believe it or not, that is exactly the same plant. So it's gone from being a green pup to being a full-colored plant within 12 months. And this is one thing I love about Nerogelia hybrids, is that if they're grown well and grown in the right conditions, they can color up to be really spectacular plants. So moving on now to the next phase in this hybridizing journey for me was to see if I could add variegation into these yellow and red banded plants. And obviously Chester Skotek is the master with variegation. He's created hundreds and hundreds of amazing variegated hybrids. For me, there seemed to be a bit of a avenue to focus on these red and yellow banded type plants, because there didn't seem to be that many variegated plants of this type around. So what I did is go back again to Golden Pheasant and tried to create some variegated plants in that smaller size range. So here are some examples of those. Typically, these were the types of plants. So I got red splashes of color on a nice variegated leaf background. If you came out with this nice red coloration, one thing I like about these type of plants with this deep red coloration, you can see that the variegation comes through and it's almost a scarlet color rather than the typical white, because of that the underlying pigment with the red leaves. And this is one I've named out of that group. This was my snow pheasant. So it's probably the closest I've come at this stage to getting a variegated version of Golden Pheasant. But snow pheasant does have all the traits of Golden Pheasant. It's a tough plant, grows well in a range of conditions, can grow well outside here, and it pups prolifically. And you can see there's a whole group of them there doing quite well in a garden situation. So what I thought I'd do is just finish up going through a hybridizing project that I've been working on over the last few years. And there's just a little bit of a teaser of some of the hybrids that have come out of this project. And because, again, I went back to Golden Pheasant to use as the base for hybridizing these plants, I've called this Project Golden Child. So to set this up, the plants I decided to use as the parent plants were snow pheasant here on the left-hand side. And I also used Life Force. So Life Force is also probably what we would call a midi-sized hybrid, but it's proved to be very tough, pups very well. But if you remember, it also has got that trait of red striation, or the red lines through the leaves. So I wanted to see how that trait would combine with a plant like snow pheasant. So the cross was set up back in 2014. Here's a photo of my original mother plant of snow pheasant. And you can see there's a result of my OCD tendencies that I think I pollinated every single flower in that flowering cycle just to make sure I had as much seed as I possibly could. One thing I like to do with these type of complex hybrids is to trace back and get an idea on how many species are involved in those parent plants, just to get an idea on, you know, potential traits or characteristics. And what I found with this particular cross is that there were at least 12 different species Nerogelia represented within the cross. So in other words, plenty of potential to come out of this particular hybridizing project. And here's a group of plants that have come out of the project. So you can see quite a wide range of leaf sizes, leaf shapes, patterns, and variegation. If you've been hybridizing with Nerogelia, you'll typically find that you only generally get a very small percentage of plants that turn out, you know, with any potential at all. Most of them have to be thrown out. This particular cross, there was a huge percentage that turned out to be well worthwhile keeping and growing on. So just to run through a few of these out of this project that have been named, a couple that have been non-variegated. This one is Golden Child Phoenix. Again, features that nice banded pattern. Golden Spring. I particularly like these types of plants that have that red ring of leaves on the outside and that nice bright center. Some of the variegated ones, this one's proved to be very popular. My Golden Child, you can see it's got very distinctive banding, which is quite attractive, and it's got albo margination on the leaves. My Golden Fever. This one hasn't been named, but it's proved to be quite popular. Every time I post it up on Facebook, it gets a huge response, but quite a nice combination of that red splashes of color with the nice variegation, all in a fairly small size package. Now, just to give you an idea on my selection process to follow a seedling that I selected out of this project from its early stages right through to the time it was given a name. So if you remember, this particular cross was set up in 2014. So just a year later, this plant proved to be incredibly vigorous. This little seedling, it's got good variegation on it. It was probably one of the first in the whole group to show hints of color and a pretty good size for just not even 1 year on from the original cross. So here it is again. It's that same seedling another year on, but the real bonus for me came with that arrow points. You can just make out there's a nicely marked albo marginated pup. And that's a huge bonus. When you're playing around with variegation with Nerogelia, you can be waiting for generations and generations, and that can take years and years and years to get a nicely marked albo marginated or medium variegated pup. So for this one to produce that pup so early on was a huge bonus. So that little pup there was taken off and given the 5-star treatment, and it proved to be very vigorous. Here it is just a year later. That's exactly that same pup grown on now to a plant, and it's got a ring of its own pups around the outside. So not only did it have good hybrid vigor, it proved to be very stable in terms of variegation, had great color. So a couple of years on, it was named and released as My Scarlet Fever, and it's gone on to prove to be a very, very popular plant through New Zealand, and is just about to be released in Australia. So for me as effectively a boutique or a backyard hybridizer, it's fantastic to be able to get a plant like this from the original cross done in 2014 to be able to have a plant like this named and released, you know, within a 5-year time frame, especially since this hybrid is variegated. Quite a good turnaround. So that project has been very successful, but obviously hybridizing doesn't stop. There's always more crosses and more plants in the pipeline. So here are some examples of just a few future projects that I'm working on, and hopefully they'll produce a few more attractive hybrids over the next few years. So watch this space. Now, just to finish up, I thought I'd give a plug for the Kiwi Broms Bromeliad Conference. We've got the Australasian Conference being held here in Auckland in 2023. It will be a fantastic conference. If you want more information on it, please go to the Bromeliad Society of New Zealand website listed here. And there is also a Kiwi Broms Facebook group set up that will just keep you up to date with what's happening with that conference. It will feature a few garden visits to some amazing gardens. And as I said earlier in the presentation, bromeliads can grow quite well in our garden conditions out here. And here are a couple of examples. So this is a local garden. Many of you on Facebook will know the name Peter Coyle and Totra Waters. And this is just one shot of a very small section of his amazing garden. But those plants grow outside year round. So you can see a great selection of Neregelia and Alcantara in the background, and then a few palms and cycads. So that garden will feature as one of the garden visits. And here's another one through our members, Paz and Jim. This is a fantastic residential garden, just absolutely full to overflowing of a variety of bromeliads. There's Variesia there, Neregelia, Acmea. She's got a few Dickia and other succulents around the area. But these are growing outside. They're in a New Zealand garden, growing outside year round. So just fantastic, lush, tropical look. Okay, look, thanks very much for your time. That's the end of my presentation. If you do want to get hold of me after this event, I am available on Facebook. I do have an Instagram set up as well under Devo Bromeliad. So I use that to post photos of a few of my new hybrids. So if you do have an Instagram account, jump on there and have a look. And I've got a very basic YouTube channel, but there are a few YouTube videos of those New Zealand gardens. So if you like what you've seen there with those couple of brief photos, there's some more of those particular gardens that are featured on that channel. So thank you very much. Thanks for your time, and look forward to taking any questions that you might have.
It was a fabulous presentation. You did a terrific job. Beautiful pictures, beautiful hybrids. I'm so impressed.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it.
Excellent, excellent presentation.
I didn't see a single plant that I wouldn't have loved to have in my garden.
Yeah, the good thing about photos is that you don't have to show the ugly ones. You just if they look good, I take a photo. If they don't make it onto the photo reels. Same with Facebook.
For Ken to say that it's very impressive because he has a wonderful collection in his garden.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Pleasure.
It was fantastic, Andrew. I loved it.
Pleasure. Thanks, Lynn. Glad you enjoyed it. You've got a few of my hybrids over there, I believe.
I've counted it. Of those that you mentioned, I've got 7.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Well, I think there's about 7 or 8 that Michael Keel originally
That's where I got them.
brought back.
And I
Yeah,
think,
so he brought those back in 2013 after one of our Bromeliad conferences. He came over as one of the speakers. But yeah, a lot of those are my early ones. So a lot of the more recent ones are only just starting to make it into Australia now.
just for interest sake, I was at that conference when Michael spoke in 2013, but I think a few of these I also got from Nigel Thompson. Possibly.
Oh, yeah. Well, Nigel's been fantastic at making a point of getting a lot of the Kiwi plants over to Australia.
Diane, do you have a question or something?
Yeah, I want to find out if we can get any of those in California.
As Lynn said, though, through Michael's Bromeliads and through Tropiflora as well with Dennis Cathcart, there's about 8 of my hybrids that Michael Keel took back in 2013 and has since managed to propagate and release. So most of those 7 or 8 should be readily available right through the States.
You said
But
Michael Kale, how do you spell that?
Michael Keel of Michael's Bromeliads in Florida.
I don't know. I don't know
Oh,
how to
it's
spell.
easy. www.michaelsbromeliads.com.
Oh,
Yeah.
Michael. Bromeliad.
Barry's got it.
Thank you.
Uh,
Beautiful.
Andrew, I
plant.
just wanted to say that Pedro Nahum had a family thing he had to attend, but he asked me to say hello to you. From
Oh, okay,
Brazil.
great. Yep, fantastic. Yeah, I love looking at his photos through on Facebook. He's got some amazing scenes and garden situations over there.
Well, also he's doing a lot of very interesting work with his big growing situation up in the northern part of the country. But he's a big believer in trying to help maintain the gene pool of the species plants. So
Right.
he's promoting a lot of species plants on a broader scale to be, grown by nurseries and sold for landscaping in Brazil.
Oh, okay,
Because
fantastic.
surprisingly enough, a lot of the plants that were taken from Brazil over the last 100 years that have formed the basis of many of our collections,
Yeah,
that didn't happen inside Brazil. Partially, well, there's lots of reasons, but the point is simply that he's doing incredible work. And of course, he's just now starting to release some of his beautiful and very tasty red pineapple hybrids.
oh, okay.
Lovely Alcantarias too, he has.
Yeah.
We'd like to see some
Well,
of your Alcantarias too. So I
you
guess we have to come to Auckland for the 2023 conference, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, booking.
I
Hopefully
wish.
the COVID will be under control by then, and you can come on out. It'll be a fantastic event.
Well, I want to encourage you to figure out who to talk to there to set up some Zoom meetings from the show. I'll
Yeah.
help do it if you want.
Yeah,
Think
well,
about
it seems to be the way of the future with this pandemic, affecting worldwide and travel and meetings. It's a great way to be able to interact like this, where we never could normally do it.
But even without the pandemic, it's a way for them to extend their reach to have the show become international.
Mm.
And as I said, I'll help sponsor it or take care of any of the administrative parts that they want. Put somebody in touch with me.
Well, yeah, Graham would be the man. He's the coordinator for the conference, and you've got him
Great.
slotted in for next month. So
Graham Barkley, yeah, he's actually for November.
November.
yeah, November. Yep.
October, we're having Ken, our vice president, talk
Oh,
about
okay.
his collection.
All right. Yeah. No, Graham's would be the man to have a chat about those options.
Okay, I will do that.
Um,
And
oh, sorry.
So go ahead.
A couple things I really liked about your presentation was showing some of your early interests that developed into your bromeliad efforts. But I was just thinking, what would it have been like if your first bromeliad meeting didn't have a hybridizer? Just
I know. Yeah.
one event got you going like a firecracker. It was amazing.
Well, I think, yeah, for me, it shows the value of local societies, and that's I'm a big advocate in joining up, because if I hadn't gone along to that first meeting, I probably wouldn't have, obviously wouldn't have joined up with society, and I'd probably just have a few bromeliads in the garden and be involved in something else. But being involved with a group of like-minded people, you really do get encouraged and inspired, and we were lucky to have some amazing hybridizers, especially guys like Jerry Stansfield, Andrew Malloy, who were creating some stunning plants. And so there was a whole generation of New Zealand hybridizers that have come on board in my era because of guys like Jerry Stansfield and Andrew Malloy. So we're very, very lucky.
But the earlier generation, let's give credit where credit's due. I love those guys, but Grace Good and Olive Trevor out of Australia. Grace Good was a friend of my mentor, R.M. Delgado. His name was Frenchie. Right. And she came over and saw the situation in Southern California in the late 60s and the early 70s, and was one of the first people to bring back a lot of good plants from Frenchie and other people,
Yeah.
Before anyone knew what bromeliads were anywhere in the world.
Mm.
You had the few botanists around, but it was just a fledgling beginning of the BSI. And even though it was established in 1951, the broader collectors market didn't really exist until the 70s.
Yeah.
But without Grace Good and Olive Trevor in Australia, Bruce Dunstan from your area,
Yeah.
who just did this miraculous thing of bringing back almost all the species of Alcantaria seeds from Brazil. And that's why you guys, Australia and New Zealand, to this day, you're the second most important Alcantaria sources genetically outside of Brazil. It's astonishing.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Bruce Dunstan's done an incredible job with introducing a lot of those plants into general cultivation. And I love his theories on feeding, fertilizing bromeliads, whereas, before that, it was sort of thought that bromeliads didn't need any fertilizer. Peter Tristram is another one. He's been an amazing collector. Been over visiting with Chester Skotak and brought a whole range of plants back to Australia, and we've been able to slowly tap into that collection as well.
And not to overplay it, but what people have to realize is that these are unique entrepreneurial people who have taken upon great expense on their own shoulders, not just to buy the plants, but I know but many of the people around the world, you don't realize how intense the importation requirements are. And it loosened up in the 70s, but by the 80s, you're talking about the cost can go up to $300 or $400 or $500 per plant for Australia or New Zealand for the government to let you bring the plant in. And on top of that, they usually gas them to death. Now it's understandable because these are island nations. So you can't afford.
I hate to break in, but we have some people with their hands up, and I'd like to recognize them.
Sure.
David, you're on mute.
David, you're muted.
David, you're muted.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Good. Andrew, thank you. Just an amazing presentation. Been collecting here in Sarasota for 24 years. I have a horticultural maintenance company called Plant Parents. People may see me on Facebook. Friends with Dennis and Michael, and can't wait to go poach a few of your babies from their nurseries. But I want to know, having a nice collection and pop a lot of plants myself, I haven't really done the seeds and gotten tickled by the bug of hybridizing. I want to know what you do to force those pups, if anything, or you just let them come naturally. I've seen a lot of techniques at Tropiflora, and I've talked with Michael Keel. I'm curious what you guys do.
Yeah, I love experimenting with plants. And so what I try and do is get ideas or encouragement from people who have got more experience than I have. And one guy in particular, obviously, is Chester Skotak. So Chester gave me some good advice years ago, saying that as a general comment, you've got to keep the seedlings, you've got to keep fertilizing them to keep them growing. So I keep that rule of thumb right through to my plants to propagate them and to produce pups. So I'll tend to try and get the best of both worlds. And I'll have a group of plants that are continually fertilized and growing and producing pups. And when it's a plant that I like and I select it out and want to name it, I'll take 2 or 3 pups out of that group, put them into a separate pot and grow them harder. So grow them with little bit less fertilizer.
Yes.
In a situation where they've got more sun. So they'll become my show plants. They're typically the plants that I've shown on this presentation or will show on Facebook. But they're the gold standard, if you like, of what that particular hybrid can look like. And then I've still got a group of plants that are growing well and producing a good range of pups. So that's my balancing act. I'm I'm not great at fertilizer. I typically either fertilize too little or too much, but that's the general rule of thumb.
Thank you.
Hey, Nancy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell the rest of you who live close. I definitely, Andrew, I really appreciated your presentation. It was wonderful.
Thanks.
But those of you from La Paloma who live close enough, I wanted to make sure you knew about the San Diego Botanic Garden has the San Diego Bromeliad Society with the San Diego Botanic Garden has put on a beautiful display that's on only through the end of actually through next Sunday. So it's been on for 6 weeks, but it's in the new conservatory, which is like a huge greenhouse, and it has gigantic bromeliads all over it. And so it's well worth coming. We have all the members contributed to it. I have 8 or 10 plants in. Pam Coity Hyatt contributed, and Renee Van Rems, who's a floral designer, put all our plants together and designed this gorgeous display. So if any of you can make it down to the San Diego Botanic Garden, it's well worth coming to. And you can stay for the whole day in the garden. You do have to go online and make a reservation. It has nothing to do with COVID. It has to do with the number of parking spaces available. So anyway,
There's
just
a video.
to let you know.
There's a video of the show that went on TV, and then I think you can find it on Facebook, on the zoo, or on the Botanic Gardens website. It is really worth
I
seeing.
think it's on the zoo. It's on the Botanic Garden. I don't think it's
Yeah.
on the zoos. It has nothing to do with the zoo. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, on the Botanic. Well, they're next to each other, right?
No,
Anyway, no.
nowhere near each other.
Oh,
San Diego Botanic Garden is in North County. It's an
oh, you mean in Encinitas?
the zoo gardens, which have almost no bromeliads in them anymore because the zoo has just not been cooperative with us.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
This
no,
is the
it's-
one that's up in Encinitas.
And if you belong to anything like the LA Arboretum or any of the other gardens, they all are reciprocal. It's like $15 to get in, but they're all reciprocal using each other's membership, so you don't have to pay them.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate, but I wanted to follow up one of David's points to Andrew. Andrew, you don't actually end up drilling your plants. I think that's kind of what David was heading towards. Sometimes with the Alcantarias that just won't pup, many producers will drill the plant into the core of the body center to force pupping. You don't do that.
No, typically I don't. It is a well-known technique, especially for Alcantaria. For the miniature neos, miniature and what we call the mini neos, I don't really find it to be an advantage unless for particular reasons you're doing it to try and stabilize variegation. So when you're doing that, I'd put that to one side, that it has its advantages, but generally I find that the miniature and mini neo hybrids grow much better when they're left to clump up. Yep. And then you get that rule of multiples where you start with one plant, it has 3 pups, those 3 pups have 3 pups, and you just let it. Don't keep cutting them off. Let it get up to a certain size, and then you'll get a great number of pups, more than you would if you went through and probably cut the center of it out or cut the pups off one by one.
Yeah, little cultural tip.
Interesting.
Any other questions?
Andrew, thank you so much, and on behalf of our club, it was a wonderful, colorful, inspiring presentation. And I'm wondering, do you have a group of people that assistants, or do you do everything yourself?
It's I do everything myself. So I don't have a nursery. I've got a very basic plastic house at the back of our section. I still work full time, and I've got 3 daughters and a granddaughter, and I'm involved in other sports and other interests. So for me, it is a hobby. I am totally obsessed with bromeliads, so it's probably more than a standard hobby. But everything I do myself.
Andrew, if you take a look down where chat is, you'll see a lot of people wrote nice comments about your presentation. So if you click on that and scroll
Okay.
down, you'll see some of the nice things people said to you.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation this evening. It's been a pleasure to spend a bit of time, and it's always fun talking Bromeliads. I can never get enough of it.
Thank you.
A+.
Thank you, Andrew. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you
Thanks,
for all
Thank
your
you.
work for putting that together for us.
Pleasure.
So hope to see all of you next month and also in November.
Nels, do you have any club things you want to talk about?
No, I don't.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording so Barry doesn't have to edit as much.
Yeah.
Thank you all for attending.
See you in 2023, Andrew.